All right, so I'm going to show you how a couple of different styles of the forks work. I showed you the basic damping rod fork, and the upgrade for that, you know, we've got our little deal here. We got some holes down here in the bottom. The deal for that, let me make these smaller just for demonstration purposes. Then we got these little small holes. Racetech has a product called the cartridge fork emulator. And what they're doing is they put a little device into an older style damping rod fork to make it act more like a cartridge fork. And what we're trying to do is get away from this curve, and we're trying to get one that's more linear. So what they have is a little device that sits on top of your damping rod, and it's got a little hat on it, and a little spring holds the hat down. Okay? Now, in the hat, top view, there's a little tiny hole, and this is our spring that's pushing down on the hat. All right? Here's the emulator. Now, this hat is covering a big hole, right? And in the hat, little hole. So what we're trying to do is we're creating basically a little blow-off valve. Remember, if we made these holes small, the fork would feel firmer, right? So this is what we're trying to do is we're trying to make little holes so it feels firm, okay? But what happens when we hit a bump? We want big holes, right? So what happens when we hit a bump is on this emulator, the hat lifts up, right? You know, there's spring pressure on it, but the oil gets pushing hard enough, then the hat lifts up. And underneath it, we've got a giant hole, right? So the giant hole is what allows the oil to just blow by and allows the wheel to soak the bump. As soon as it soaks the bump, the hat slams back down into place, and you're back to your little hole. So it gives you the best compromise, I mean the best, not compromise, but the best overall performance you could come up with. So more low-speed damping by effect of this hole. And once that little hole, you move the oil through it fast enough that it wants to lock up, the whole hat starts. You know, that's when the hat lifts, right? So people that are trying to fool with these holes are a lap down on people that aren't using this part. If you don't have this part, you are a lap down. It's just that much better. People that run these emulators are just blown away by the increase in performance in their fork.
I've heard people say they can hear that valve come off. Are they hearing something else?
I think they're hearing something else. I couldn't imagine that because it's, you know, submerged in oil and, you know, put it this way, the sound of a bump, you know, your bike going goosh, you know, is going to be harder than that. So I can't imagine somebody hearing that. Particularly since in any given fork, the fork spring is sliding in the steel tube. Now, you know, it's only under oil and it's dry on the top, and you know, you're always going to almost hear something going on in the suspension, and that's just the springs rubbing up and down the side of a steel tube, and that's going to be way louder. This thing is, that spring is smaller than the OD of a pencil, or it's approximately the OD of a pencil, and it's about that long. So the action is.
So an emulator designed to work with the existing holes in a damper rod?
No, so that's so what we do is you defeat the damping rod, right? You go into it and you blow these holes out huge, right? So you go in and you make the Swiss cheese this thing and make it so that it doesn't work anymore. And then we drop the simulator on top and it takes over and does all the work for the compression damping. It's held in place by the fork spring, right? Fork spring sits down on top of it and pinches it there.
So that's what the emulator is doing, is just completely voiding the fact that there's actually actual damper rods in it.
Yeah, it's fooled into, you know, it's fooled into acting, you know, it fools the damping rod fork into acting more like a cartridge fork. Now, the emulator only controls compression damping. Rebound damping is controlled as normal. Now, on this style of fork, you're going to end up having to, the only way you can change rebound damping is by changing the viscosity of the oil, thicker oil. One thing to keep in mind is as you thicken the oil up in a damping rod fork, you're affecting the way the compression damping works. So you may end up tuning the pressure on this spring, which is a tuning variable for it, right? You can put more or less pressure on the spring, or you may end up just changing the viscosity of the oil, you know, you're trying to get more rebound damping, so you've gone to thicker oil, so you may end up having to soften the spring to restore the same feel out of that bike, right? So that's damping rod forks. And while I call them, you know, older style, you know, one of the most popular bikes in the world is the SV650, and obviously the SV is, you know, an 03 model bike. So But to make that thing at, you know, get that at the price point they build it, that's why it's got that part in it, you know.